So, one of the questions that we frequently get is about what's the difference between competencies and outcomes and objectives. And sometimes these terms are actually used interchangeably. It's not surprising that they become confusing. And so I don't want you to get bogged down and get confused with this tonight. So let's just kind of go through what they are really quick. So, course competencies. These are our district requirements for course instruction. So you're being given those course competencies when you take a class that you're going to teach. And if you're not sure what the course competencies are for the course that you teach, you can find those online at the district website. They're also getting automatically pushed into your concourse syllabus. So that's really great because you have them at your fingertips and students have them at their fingertips. So students know what it is that they should be learning in the courses that they're taking. So that's usually the high level of um, of a learning objective. The course competency is that overarching competencies that we're expected to teach to over the course of the semester. Learning outcomes is another term that you're going to hear frequently at Chandler Gilbert. And we usually at Chandler Gilbert talk about learning outcomes when we talk about those general education student learning outcomes at Chandler Gilbert. So you might be familiar with SLOAC. You may have been using Canvas rubrics already to score those general education student learning outcomes, such as communication or critical thinking. Those are examples of our college-wide learning outcomes. And we use those across courses in the same discipline. So we can measure how a group of students are meeting these general, broad learning outcomes that we have for our students at Chandler Gilbert Community College. Learning objectives. So learning objectives and course competencies are the two that we've been talking to you about so far. And so your learning objectives are usually something that's a little more focused than your course competency. So if you have a broad course competency, you might write 1, 2, 3 different learning objectives that will meet that course competency that you will use across your lessons in order to meet the course competency. So a learning objective is going to be a little more specific than your course competency, and it's going to focus on those measurable learning goals that you want the students to meet in order to meet those course competencies. Lesson objectives, you may not go that specific as you're doing your planning. The reason you might use a lesson objective would be to take that learning objective even more specific. So if you find that your course competency and your learning objectives are still a little broad, you want to give maybe goals for what you want students to accomplish in this particular lesson. Well, that might be your lesson objective, and you could think of it as a lesson goal for the students. Again, you don't have to write those, but those are things that might help you to focus as you're figuring out how you want to do your assessments. So one of the things that I wanted to mention is that you're going to have in the HQ Basecamp course, there is a really awesome chart that helps you look at those Bloom's verbs and the types of assessments that can help you meet the different Bloom's verbs. So as we're thinking about writing our lesson objectives or our learning objectives based on course competencies, we want to take our cues from the Bloom's verbs in the course competency. This is going to help us know what level of learning we should be assessing. So, for an example, if a course competency calls for evaluation, then assessment that is only asking students to identify something is not allowing those students to demonstrate the appropriate level of learning that is expected for the course, because identify is that sort of lower level of learning, whereas evaluation is a much higher level of learning. And the reverse could be true. Many of the introduction classes that we teach, the verb identify might actually be used. And so asking them to evaluate might be taking them beyond the curriculum they're expected to learn in the course. They'll get into doing evaluation as they dig deeper into that particular discipline, if that's where they go with their major. So it's just something to think about. You're going to go back to those course competencies, look at those Bloom's verbs and then look at that Bloom's learning chart and see where those verbs fall, and that will help you determine what kind of assessments that we want to develop as we go forward.